Hello and welcome back to Porous Borders. This is episode 5, the first episode of 2020, and today on the show is an interview with Will Guthrie. If you're not familiar with Will Guthrie's work, he's an Australian percussionist who started out in Melbourne and now is based in Nantes in France, and he has a lot going on. He's released a huge number of solo recordings for solo percussion, as well as a number of musique concrète recordings and many more collaborations with people like Richard Dawson, RnM Bocce, Keith Rowe, Ava Mendoza, and Mark Fell. In 2019, Will released a bunch of great records, a solo tape called Some Nasty from the Indonesian label Hasana Editions, as well as a collaboration with Sam Shalabi, Mark Fell, and RnM Bocce called Oglon, and a duo record with RnM Bocce called Knotting. In 2019, he also released a split tape with my friend and future podcast guest Gendes on the Noise Bombing label, and you'll hear more about that label on next week's episode, which will be out on Tuesday the 7th. And it's just started to rain very heavily outside, so maybe you can hear that in the background. Recently, Will has been traveling to Southeast Asia a lot, which is where we met and recorded this interview. And just a quick technical note, you'll hear a bit of popping on Will's mic, which is 100% my bad mic placement and not Will's fault at all. So I've tried to EQ out the worst of it, but you'll definitely notice it a little bit. If you check out the show notes, you can find a link to a video of one of Will's recent performances from his last Southeast Asian tour last November, as well as links to all of the previously mentioned releases. I really enjoyed this conversation. Will is a really incredible musician and a very nice person as well. So we had a great chat and hope you enjoy it. Next week I'll be back and we'll be going to a Tuesday release schedule, so the next episode will be on the 7th of January, next Tuesday. And I'll be doing a number of interviews focused on the Jogja Noise Bombing Collective. They have their annual festival coming up at the end of January. So I'll be talking to some of the people who are involved in organizing and performing at that festival, so you can look forward to that starting on Tuesday. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Will Guthrie.
Older than me, he was into music, so he was kind of listening when when he was like 14, 15 or whatever. I must have been 7 or 8, and he was really into like Led Zeppelin. His 3 favorite bands were Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and The Who. So that was the first kind of music that I had a connection to in a way through him. And then at the same time, my sister was really into hip hop, so I was kind of also listening to like the early kind of stuff, Grandmaster Flash, and then Run DMC, and all this stuff kind of happened. So that was kind of a big thing as well. And then I probably seriously got into music, probably when I was around 13, 14, because basically my parents got me this shitty old drum kit, and I actually heard, this is like kind of embarrassing, but I still love this band. This Weather Report song.
Oh yeah.
And it was kind of like I just had this really weird epiphany where it was like, okay, music doesn't have to be vocal orientated, because I don't really listen or relate to words in music. I can listen to the same song for 10 years and the words don't mean anything to me. So anyway, it was this sort of thing where I understood that certain music could be, without vocals and longer forms and stuff like that, and it completely opened me up to another world of music, including jazz. So that was kind of how it all started.
And you studied jazz at university, right?
Yeah. I was playing drums from like 13 or whatever, and I was getting some lessons, and then I went to the VCA in Melbourne, which was kind of like, they didn't even call it a jazz course, it was about improvisation, and the guy running it at the time, called Brian Brown, had a strong focus on trying to sort of discover what it meant to be an Australian improvising musician. Yeah, so the first year was sort of like, we looked at jazz and standards and harmony and all of that, but he was kind of quick smart, saying, okay, you're all white kids from the burbs in Melbourne or whatever, like, what does it mean to be a jazz musician in, it was like the mid-90s and early 90s. What does that mean? So it was straight away kind of asking those questions about culture and where you're from and the music that you play and how you relate to it. So it was a strong focus on trying to look for some kind of Australian identity through that music, whatever that is.
That's really interesting. I think, that's something I think about a lot with music. And what's like what's your take on it at this point, I guess, like many years later?
It's pretty complex question, because same, I like ask myself about this stuff all the time, and even more recently, because I've as you know, I'm like really into like gamelan music, different gamelan musics, and I don't know, I just try, for me personally, after I think that like subject about jazz in the early days opened me up to that, because I knew that I couldn't play straight ahead jazz and feel okay about it. Like that just wasn't possible for me. And I also kind of knew that whenever I tried to do it, it would just never be anywhere near as good as when you'd hear like Americans do it. And also, the whole history of Black America, there's a context and a climate that I can't understand. So I never even tried. And that's what was great and encouraging about my studies, because they were sensitive to that subject. And then I don't try to intellectualize it anymore. It's just if I'm drawn to certain music, I don't really question that, and I'm happy to I've studied a bit of gamelan music and South Indian Carnatic music, but I've never tried to actually play that music. It's not my music, and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that under my own name. I would participating in an ensemble or something, but never under my name. So it's a tricky thing.
Yeah. So you came here last year for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were you just playing shows, or did you do some? Did you sit in with a ensemble?
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I played a bit of gamelan stuff when I was at uni years ago, like over 20 years ago, Javanese. And then have been an avid listener ever since. And then I came last year because I wanted to see more what was happening here in both scenes, in the more kind of traditional scene and also in the more kind of noise scene, what we're involved in. And I've played a little bit in different ensembles on a really low level, to be honest. Like I wouldn't profess to have any kind of competence whatsoever, other than the very basics. But when I came here, and what I loved about it was I was checking out different gamelan groups and events and stuff, different styles, and some of the rehearsals that I kind of went to, basically it's such an inclusive, what I saw, an inclusive environment, where I rocked up to a few places and they were like, oh, you're into gamelan, and I'm like, yeah, and they're like, here, you're playing, and they just kind of hand me a stick, and then I'd have someone next to me showing me the song, the piece that they were playing, and kind of going through it with me patiently. And it was just a thing about participation, and they were kind of flattered and happy that me and a bunch of other foreigners were here really interested and in love with their music. So I think that whole question about cultural appropriation when you come here, it's a bit different as well, you know, because they're so happy that we're interested in that culture. I never heard that from any Indonesians ever. That like, oh, what, you're playing our music or whatever. It's kind of like, you know, white people talking for white people once again. You know, it's not.
Yeah, and like if you see people here who have grown up with gamelan, like in the experimental scene, there's no like, people aren't precious about experimenting with it, and like, you know, you can, like Gendes, for example, does a lot of stuff with bells and stuff.
Yeah.
And, it's like, people think it's cool. Like the older guys think it's cool and interesting, and
For sure. I mean, I think there's another element in the more traditional scene. Like I saw some stuff in Surikada, which was kind of like, no, you don't mess with these instruments.
Right.
Like I respect that. There's cultural and religious and, you know, contexts for some certain pieces of music. And that's something to be respected and, you know, upheld or whatever. I would never want to offend anyone. But, I think it depends on the environment. But I agree. Most people I met, you know, here are super open to the idea of different types of collaboration and using those instruments as well in different ways. You know? Whereas some of the sort of gamelan aficionados I've met in other places, like in Australia or France or whatever, they're real kind of purists. You know, they're really trying to keep it as pure and untainted as possible, and that's not my world. Yeah. But I like listening to it.
Do you you more experience with Javanese than Balinese?
Maybe a little bit, only in the senses that's what I did when I was at uni. And then I've spent more time in Java. I haven't been to Bali yet. I'm going in 3 days. But then, you know, there's in my music, for me, you know, to be a bit kind of, to generalize, like there's a lot of the Balinese stuff I try to do on the drums. It's kind of more fast, syncopated, different styles that I've looked into a little bit, that I kind of work on that stuff. And then, but I love the more kind of slower, airy, you know, with the elastic time in a lot of the Javanese stuff. And some of this stuff crosses over too. I'm being super general about it all. But these ideas, I see that stuff as like ideas in music as opposed to styles. You know, it's sort of like that stuff interests me in many different ways. I mean, you could say some of the Javanese stuff sounds like Sano, like it's not that far, you know, it's like you're doubling certain frequencies. There's kind of there's many aspects to the music that you can compare to a bunch of other stuff that we're all listening to. So it's, for me, I hear it more like that than in any kind of, in another sense.
When you were in Melbourne, you started what became Make It Up Club, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me the story a bit about how that kicked off?
Yeah, that kicked off because there was nowhere to play at all for us. You know, people of my generation who we were studying at the VCA, and there was a bunch of older guys, a guy called David Tolley who's passed away now, and Ren Walters, who's an amazing guitarist from Melbourne who was teaching at the VCA. And they were very much about free improvisation, probably in a more kind of European sense, like not jazz related whatsoever, and more about kind of sound for sound's sake, but quite sort of interactive and choppy, I guess. I guess you could say it like that, to generalize. And there was sort of like, we were way too weird for the jazz scene. And then there was kind of there was, you know, sporadic events from a thing called What Is Music Festival that was run by Robbie Avename and Oren Ambarchi. But on a regular basis, there wasn't much going on in Melbourne at that time. So we kind of did it just as, you know, as musicians do, to to have somewhere to play regularly. And we started doing it every Tuesday night. I tried to start this kind of collective that didn't work. I ended up doing everything myself. Me and Ren Walters, we were kind of the mainstays throughout all of that. We really tried hard to get this collective thing going, but it's pretty hard. And but it, it hobbled along for a few years, and then different people took over, and it's still going, which is pretty amazing. And some of the same people, like Sean Baxter and the great drummer from Melbourne, and there's a few people still around that were kind of really there at the start, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. So did your involvement stop when you left Australia?
No, I stopped way before.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of burnt out. I got pretty sick of it, and I took a break from music for a little while.
Right.
And it's thankfully people took over and probably did a better job than I was doing at the end. So it was still going for quite a few years before I left, and then I left, and it's actually still going. So, yeah.
And now you said last night you've been in France for 15 years, right?
Yep.
How did you end up going there?
Basically, I did a tour in Europe, and the plan was to live in London after that and study a bit with a drummer called Eddie Prévost from RnM. And I actually did that for a bit, but I met my partner in France, so I moved there in early 2004. And then it was a good place to be in Europe, where I could travel to other places. And it took a while to get stuff happening in France, but I was kind of playing in other places in Europe. And then I just felt I needed to leave Australia to kind of continue doing what I wanted to do. At a certain point, the decision was pretty clear.
Was it? I guess there's kind of a bit of a ceiling in Australia where you can only play a few cities, and it takes such a long time to get anywhere else to play in another country.
Yeah. And touring's really hard. You can only, play Melbourne, Sydney, there's a few other spots, but even, it's really far.
Yeah.
It's expensive. And I was just doing a lot of, I was kind of like a working musician. I was just playing in heaps of different projects and mainly jazz stuff.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't very happy at all doing what I was doing. I was just kind of, if you called me, I'd be like, yeah, what's the gig? And I'd just do it. That was awesome. I did that from when I was 17 till when I left. But then when I left, I sort of heard about this place called Europe that was like, you can actually get paid for doing what you do instead of playing at a wedding for some yuppie 20-year-old or something. Yeah. So I was like, wow, okay, I'm going there. And it was true, I went there, and there were people actually interested in experimental music and improvised music, and there was festivals and this whole kind of culture of stuff that there's a little bit in Australia for sure, but it's pretty hard to make it work if you want to do just that. Yeah. So,
were you ever in France? Were you ever doing more straight ahead jazz?
Yeah, I had to at the start. Yeah.
So standards and stuff?
Yeah, I've done thousands of gigs like that.
So I know there's quite a big jazz culture in France, but I don't know much about it.
It's different to Australia. It's weird because when you're in Australia, you always want to go to Europe, but then somehow I think I prefer to play in a bar, like a shitty bar, playing jazz but playing more or less what I want, than in some of these kind of uptight contemporary jazz projects where it's actually you're getting paid and it's, I don't know, it's a funny thing. Over in France, it's all really project based, so they get together these projects and it tours and it's all kind of slick and professional. But I don't know, I never really done that scene. Right. I'd prefer to play in a bar or something I really still love doing that. Yeah. It's really, and it's also this idea that the music's maybe for everyone, instead of just this very select sort of jazz snob audience, which is what you'd get in the more kind of funded jazz circuit in Europe, where it's just kind of old dudes. You know, there's no young people, very few, and there's no women. There's like all the cliches of that kind of scene. It's more or less true. Whereas when you play in bars, there's still this a bit like old school like that. There's still this kind of thing where you maybe if you're concerned about the audience, like you got to try and make something work. You got to bring them to you. And I love that old idea that you need to kind of bring the people to your music somehow in that kind of context. I don't see much point in just going in somewhere like that and just like hammering out your own thing, which you could do in a place more specifically for the music that you play. But when you're in that context, I like that challenge of just, it's kind of cool.
So how much of your... because I know you're on tour a lot, so how much of the shows you play are in France and like at home, and how much is on the road?
Probably play more in France than anywhere else, but not much. I'm like trying to get out as much as possible. Yeah. I don't know. Depends. Some years, I guess some years there's a lot going on in France. Other years it's in Europe. Other years sometimes it's other places, and it depends who I'm working with as well, I guess.
I wanted to ask you about so your album People Pleaser that you put out a couple years ago. I really connected with it, and I was just kind of curious how you went about putting it together. Because like there's obviously you're drumming on it, but there's a lot going on that's not even percussion on it.
For sure. I kind of done quite a few albums earlier before using just electronics and like recorded amplified percussion and stuff. But never mixed with drums. And with People Pleaser, I tried to bring... And then I'd done albums of like only drums, kind of acoustic. And People Pleaser, I tried to bring these two things together, like more kind of electroacoustic, like montage kind of stuff, and using noise and electronic sounds and field recordings and stuff, and mix that with recorded acoustic drums and percussion. And then the other thing was that we were waiting for like my second daughter to be born, and so we were basically at home with my partner, and you couldn't do anything. You can't go anywhere. It's like it might come at any time. And it was a really cool kind of peaceful time where we knew this thing was coming and it was going to like totally change our lives again. It was our second kid. And so we were just at home together, kind of doing our own thing, puttering around the house. And I had a bunch of stuff on my computer already recorded. And I just started working on a few small pieces, and I was like, okay, I might just do like one small piece a day, like 2-3 minutes or whatever. And I started doing it, and with this idea of mixing kind of different recordings I had of the drums with all this stuff that was kind of lying around at home, and like I'd just pick up what I remember. I was watching all these old films about Vietnam War and stuff, because I don't know, I watched that as a kid, and it was a bit nostalgic. Like you're coming into this kind of like big life experience, and I started checking out all these films I watched as a kid, and I was recording a bunch of the sound and using that in People Pleaser, and so it was just this sort of like oral diary of where I was at right then at that moment. And just did a tiny little piece every day, and then kind of worked on bringing it all together. And the whole thing was done in like 2 weeks, basically. Yeah, because I mean, I had most of the material anyway, and then I was recording bits and pieces. And I did record a few things. I went to a church and did this field recording, and it was all just a bunch of crap lying around the house, like either recorded or stuff that I was using at that time, working on. And just kind of sculpting the sound and putting it all together in the studio, and there's nothing live at all. Like the drumming's live, but but all the stuff around it's kind of built, cut and paste on the computer, and yeah, but it was really fun. It was really like also great to do something so quickly, because normally I'm like this maniac who spends, a year on 7 minutes of music when I'm doing this electroacoustic stuff. So this one was super. I wanted it really rough and ready, and I didn't spend that much time on it. I kept it. I wanted to keep it pretty nasty. So. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
You were saying like things you have lying around the house and stuff, and that seems like a big part of your approach to like last night you were playing with a block of wood and like
block of piece of shit. Yeah.
Is there a lot of thought that goes into choosing those kind of, I don't know what
block
you call
of
them, like
specific block of wood.
Other things
actually there
besides
is.
Your drums.
Yeah, kind of, because it's like it needs to have a purpose. Like the wood actually has a purpose. It's just this plank, and actually has certain sonic characteristics that I find really interesting.
Right.
But it's also used as a contrast to the more metal gong stuff. So it's this kind of sharp sound with no resonance or very little resonance, so which I like using in combination with the more, the longer tones I can get from the bowls and the gongs and stuff like that. So yeah, in a way it's that. It's also about trying to be really economic with my material, because I'm traveling a lot, and it's also, there's a practical element to it where I can't be carrying like crazy amounts of gear. So yeah, these things are sort of chosen for what you can do with each element, and being able to have the most possibilities with the least amount of material, which is kind of, I like that approach. It's nice to have a whole bunch of stuff, and sometimes I do it when I'm at home, when I can drive to the gig and have all my own gear. But if you're on the road, it's pretty unrealistic anyway, so you need to be economical. It's like the Air Asia or EasyJet of
sure.
It's a pretty shit idea, but it's just kind of a reality.
We were talking about, you went to the creepy market in Solo last time you were here. Is that something you do a lot, like just going and looking for stuff in old markets?
For sure. Whenever I can, you don't hardly ever find anything good. Maybe like once every. I don't know. It's like this really nice idea that you'll walk into this old school market and stumble upon like, an amazing gong or something, but you never do. But I did in Solo, in Suricata, I did actually find they had the keys, the brass keys for like a saron, one of the gamelan instruments, without the box, the sound box. So I bought these keys, which I took home and built the box to kind of put it together, which I was pretty surprised. But this place in Suricata, they had a bunch of really old gongs, most of them in really bad nick, but they had a lot of gamelan instruments, mainly gongs, and a few other bits and pieces, which I was pretty surprised about. And that place was amazing. It was just this, like, I love those places because you feel like you're in this. Have you ever been there?
Yeah.
I mean, the place is insane.
It's a little claustrophobic, but it's so cool. Like,
it's like a walk back in
like
time,
Like each little like hallway between all this stuff is like a whole world inside it.
I love those places, and you actually feel like, you're actually in people's living rooms or something, and there's all these personal objects. I love that, and it's so impersonal the way we live now. Like there's everything's sort of, you go in all these places and with no character whatsoever. From the hotel to the airport to the bar to everywhere we go is this sort of like, feels like just chain restaurants and chain this and chain that. So you go to these, hungry, like a lot of people, hungry for that feeling of you're actually in something a bit more kind of real and human. So this place was the real deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was fantastic. Loved it.
As all the old 50s radios and TVs
Yeah,
and stuff.
I took a bunch of
Super
old cool photos of all these really amazing gongs and radios and tape machines, which is sort of like, it's this one photo I took which for me summed up like most of what I'm interested in, like electroacoustic music and noise music, but kind of on the lo-fi end using tape and radio interference and all this different kind of lo-fi cheap electronics and gongs and percussion, and they were just sitting there on this like in this pile together. It was a really nice photo for me. It was like that's what I'm into. Right there, that big pile of rubbish. That's it's my world.
Have you been to the afternoon one here?
No, I haven't.
Oh yeah, you should check that out. It's near, like if you go to the Wayang performance one night, it's really close. It's like a 10-minute walk.
Okay.
And it's like it's called Pasar Sore. It's like an afternoon market.
Okay.
And it's like a pop-up thing, so people just
rock
come
up
and set up and
bring
all this old gear. I think a lot of the noise guys go there to look for
buy cheap electronics and stuff. Yeah. I mean, those places, it's makes sense with our music too. It's sort of like, I also like that idea of being really economical with what we have, you know. I'm just not into I don't feel the need to buy new shit all the time. It's just like, I like the idea of continuing to use stuff that I have or stuff that other people have used, and
when did you start doing that as part of your approach to playing drums? Is it
you mean using objects and stuff? I mean, I guess it was like mid-90s, when I was working with like David Tolley and RnM and these guys, I was trying to get away from jazz. I was trying to kind of get away from the constraints of the kit as we know it, and it was this massive block for me, mind block to bring other bits and pieces to the kit. Like, I just couldn't get my head around it. It seemed sort of just, I felt like a real fake kind of doing it. Like, I'd bring like really lame like cowbells and shit. It's terrible, you know. I couldn't get my head around it. And then I saw this great drummer from Melbourne called Steve Heather, who lived in Berlin at the time. And then I saw Tony Buck, and then I saw Robbie Avenayam, and these guys were kind of using lots of objects and small percussion. And then I kind of looked more into, you know, it's good to know the context for certain things too, because then I was talking to them, and then I was kind of looking at, you know, what a lot of the European drummers did in the improv scene from the 60s onwards. People like Han Bennick and Paul Lovins and Paul Litton and these people. And, you know, these guys were doing that. It was also a way for them to get away from the more standard jazz kind of setup by using small percussion and bits of junk and bits of this and that to kind of augment the sound of the drums and add to the vocabulary, basically. And then you look into that and you realize from the 60s onwards, drummers have been doing that, you know, probably even the 50s, like, and there's a really rich history of people doing that for a long time. Yeah. That's something good to tap into, because it's not like, you know, I never felt like I was discovering anything when you hear these guys, because it's like, oh shit, this has been going on for a really long time. So it wasn't, for me it was new, but it was like it had been there for a long time. Yeah. So that was sort of and also then I started playing with guys from Sydney called Matthew Earl and Adam Sussman, who had a duo called Stasis Duo. And they were using electronics, and I had to kind of develop sounds that would work with what they were doing, because if I played like standard kit with sticks or whatever, it just didn't work. It just sounded completely stupid. So it was kind of the music I was playing, there was a necessity for me to find different approaches, which is always good when you sort of got those like restraints that force you to rethink what you're doing to be able to fit with other people. I think that's when the collaboration becomes kind of really interesting. So that was like, real kind of ass kicking actually to find ways to deal with these musical problems, and then looking at the history too, and seeing that that also had been going on for a long time, and so, but it's a good thing when you're an instrumentalist to have to completely rethink. I stopped playing the drums at that time. I couldn't do it on the drums. It always sounded like the drums.
Yeah.
So now I've come back to that a bit now, but back then it was I had to stop. So I took a bass drum and I put it on the floor, and I kind of used the bass drum as like a sound resonator for all these different objects, and I'd play the objects on the bass drum, so it would kind of be amplified by the bass drum, and it was a way of getting away from sort of playing more jazzy type stuff in that context. So sometimes you got to change the actual instrumentation to look for a different music.
This tour you're doing is a pretty DIY kind of.
Yeah, totally.
I guess nearly all touring in Indonesia is, unless you're a huge band playing cigarette company.
Yeah, I think it is all in Asia, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think I've played heaps in Asia and in Southeast Asia, and also in China and in Japan, and I've never Hong Kong and Taiwan, but I've like played maybe twice in things with money or more kind of institutional things. I don't mind. It's good. It's great. Yeah, it's a good.
Yeah, but you're still pretty DIY in terms of everything you do, right? Like,
I mean, I don't see any other way to do it, to be honest. It's like, because the institutional stuff in Europe or Australia, it's so boring, it's so conservative and boring. But that's where there's some money, so you need to find, to be totally honest, I see positives and negatives in both the scenes. I think the institutional stuff can be really sort of dull, and that's a shame, because you kind of get these really sort of slick projects of like great musicians, or it's all a bit lame somehow. It's kind of lacking that urgency we all want, like to feel like we're at punk shows again or something. But then the punk shows like can be so limited in terms of like gear, and like if you got anything more ambitious than like a PV amp and like a shitty drum kit, they're like, what? We can't find that. So there's real limitations on the actual music because of that as well. So I think there's a nice balance in between. But if you give me the choice, I'd play in some sweaty, shitty little room any day, because that's how I started, So I don't never want to stop doing that. And that's where the young people are too. I mean, it's not. I don't know. I'm like 42 now. I have a bit of a different perspective on that. I don't want to play to like freaking old jazz nerds in Europe. Like I want to. It's not as awesome as that can be too. It's no judgment on the audience. It's more just like there's more energy around the younger scenes, and that's something that there's no money, and it can be rough and bit whatever, but it's way more fun.
So how I guess if you're mostly half right, DIY. And
I couldn't say I'm only doing DIY stuff. In Europe, I'm doing a lot of institutional stuff, so it's not.
So that's kind of how you make a living, and then kind of funds doing stuff like this.
Exactly. And I try to keep that balance, because I don't want to do one without the other. To be honest, I like, as I said, I see the limitations in both. And I think I try to use this institutional stuff to be able to navigate my way into more upcoming more DIY stuff. But I don't even know what DIY means. I mean, it's all we've ever done. So I remember arriving in Europe and everyone was like, DIY, and I was like, what the fuck's that? Like, we never had any funding, so it's not. If there's no DIY, there's no nothing. It's I never thought Make It Up Club was DIY. It was just like we needed a place to play, and we did it, and no one else was going to do it, so that's it.
Yeah.
And in Europe, they make this big distinction between DIY and funded stuff because they actually have funded places.
Yeah.
They actually have something to compare it to.
Yeah.
But the rest of the world, man, it's fucking DIY everywhere. It's like, no one's saying we're DIY. It's just like, well, we just play music.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I never want to lose that because that's just, young nerds like us, well, I'm not so young anymore, but, like music nerds really into the music, just doing it because they love it. Whereas in Europe, people, it's their job, and there's a big difference in their energy that goes into the projects when that's happening. Yeah, you see it straight away.
Yeah.
But as you said, it does fund other stuff, so yeah.
You have a label, right?
Not really anymore.
Really
No, the same deal. It was just more from necessity than anything else, because no one was putting. You just did it to get my music out, sort of thing. So, and then I stopped when other people started wanting to put my music out.
That's so time-consuming doing
that
kind of stuff on your own.
I know. I mean, I might come back to it one day, but I don't even know what to think about that anymore. Like, I still make albums because I love doing that. Like, I believe in that medium. As an interesting alternative to producing work to playing live. But in terms of the whole sort of business side of it or whatever, it's pretty messy. I don't think about it that much, to be honest. I mean, I'm aware of it because I have to be, but not really. I don't have the time or energy for a label. And I think it's a pretty tough time to be doing that now. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Don't know if I really want to go there.
Yeah. This year you put out a new record with, live. So you did the Nodding is the title, right? The record you did with RnM Bocce.
Yep.
You guys have done performances of that piece for years now, right?
Yeah. I replaced a friend of mine called Joe Talia, another drummer from Melbourne. He originally did it with Oren. It's kind of a piece by Oren. And then I was doing it in Europe because Joe wasn't around when Oren would get gigs in Europe. And then we've done it a couple of times. Yeah, we've done it quite a bit over the last few years. And then, so Knotting is kind of the version of that piece, Knots, that Oren already did with Joe live. And it's a bit different, I guess. It's my kind of take on it. And then I've done different stuff with Oren as well, where I've played on one of his records, and we just put out a record called Oglon Day with me, him, Mark Fell, and Sam Shalabi, who's a Canadian Egyptian musician who plays oud. Right. And Mark Fell's playing kind of weird rhythmic electronic computer music stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you what it was like working with him, actually.
Yeah.
I heard a story about him doing... He did a record with like Okyung Lee and some other people, where it kind of sounded like he was just trying to make it really difficult for them, giving them really weird stuff and in their ears and making them respond to it in weird ways. But what was your experience making that record like?
We haven't made... that record was cool because it was pretty straightforward, and we were just all together in London for a day, and we did it, and we had to be super quick about it. And Oren kind of ran the show on that one, actually, and it came out well. It was good. And then me and Mark play as a duo, and we're going to record hopefully in January.
Right.
I really love Mark. I love his music. I really think, even from a sort of drum nerd perspective, he's really added something quite different and unique to that world of electronic rhythmic music.
Yeah.
He really did, and I think he's there's a few people. I don't know, I think of Square Pusher, I think of Jay Dilla, I think I'd put him up there with that. He's actually introduced this other kind of vocabulary that I find super interesting.
Yeah, it's a huge body of work too.
It really is, and it's influence. You hear it everywhere now, and it's sort of like, it's that stuff, but it's like, wow, I didn't hear that shit like 15 years ago. Yeah, I mean, that's his world. I mean, it's from, there's other influences in there too, but it's, for me, it's super interesting from a purely rhythmic point of view. From almost like a really drummer's perspective, it's really like very unique contribution to this music. So I love him from that point of view, from a musical point of view, and also working with him because he's kind of not easy. Like he's like throwing shit. He's looking for problems in the music, so to speak. Right. He doesn't want to do kind of certain things, which I respect, and I think, you know, it's like that, like working with Adam and Matt, like you constantly have to rethink your approach to how you're going to work with him, because you don't just rock up and play, like you need to use your brain, and I really love that. So he's great to work with. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the recording in next year, hopefully in January.
Cool. I'll be looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No.
So you're playing here this afternoon with some local people.
Yeah.
What are you expecting from the performance?
I don't know.
Have you done any prep with communicating with people or anything?
Not really.
Yeah.
No. I'm curious about these guys. This group, Total Percussi, which I like what I read about them, because they seem to be kind of on the fringes of a bunch of different music, playing kind of contemporary new music, and also doing some improvisation. And they're a percussion group, but they're also building their own stuff, from what I heard. And so I mean that sort of seems to be all interesting stuff for me. So I'm curious what it'll be like. But no, I'm just going there. I got no idea, to be honest.
That should be cool. I think I haven't been to the place where it's at, but it's not really like a place you'd go if you were on holiday here or anything. So that'll be
like
cool.
that idea too, for sure. I mean, I think that's the thing coming here to Asia, like getting off the beaten track a little bit seems to be harder and harder. And when you can actually do it, and I think that's what I love about Indonesia too, through like gamelan and stuff, like there is a way to be really in Indonesian culture, as opposed to like our sort of noise scene or whatever. As awesome as it is, it's way more familiar to me, that, you know, because I've been doing it for a while. Whereas the more traditional music side of things, I can feel like a dumb newcomer, and I love that feeling. And then this with these guys, Total Percussi, like I like this idea of being out of the way a bit, and we're gonna work with kids and stuff. There's a workshop, so that's always really cool. Way to actually spend some time with people from here. It's awesome.
That'll be great.
Yeah, I hope.
Yeah. You've toured so much in so many different places, and I was kind of wondering, like, what is the weirdest thing that's happened to you while you've been on tour, or weirdest show you've played, or...
Oh man, there's been heaps, but I don't know. To be honest, some of the weirdest... To be honest, some of the weirdest contexts are not so much in this noise scene, but like, I don't know, I remember when I first moved to France, I was playing in this like caravan park in this really shit blues band. And I mean, that for me is like, it was just surreal as fuck, you know. It was just the scene, the people that came to the shows. You get all these kind of French wannabe cowboy kind of biker types. And it was just like, and I grew up in Melbourne. One of my first gigs was in this blues band, and we actually played these biker places. And I was like this little nerd, you know? And I remember playing these places just being like so fucking freaked out by some of these dudes. They were kind of hardcore bikers in this blues band. And then you go and do that in France. So there's like all these guys dressed up as cowboys and shit. And you're in the middle of Vendée. It's so surreal.
Yeah.
I kind of think it's more stuff like that.
Yeah.
Last year I played in this, like I told you in the car last night, but replaced this drummer in this cover band. And it was basically like a hookah bar in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. For 2 nights, which was like probably one night too many, but that's the shit. I like that stuff. You know? It's just out there. It's just really different experience, and through music, I've played in African bands and stuff, and played in a flamenco. We used to play in this flamenco group in Melbourne, and I don't know. There's some really interesting through music. We're lucky to be able to visit and play in some quite strange contexts, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff comes to mind. I played in this like jock like house party in America near Philadelphia once.
Okay.
And they were all just like these 20-year-old white kind of muscly jocks, like noise jocks, and that was fucking weird as fuck. And then, I've played in like soup kitchens in Nantes where I live. We used to organize shows for these like homeless people that would come in and get like a free lunch. I like playing contexts where it messes a bit with the idea of the public. Like I find our scene pretty it's pretty tiny, and sometimes it's frustrating, you know. So I understand like what we did with Make It Up Club, what most of these sort of noise communities have to do by necessity. They have to build their own thing, and they sometimes kind of need to keep it purist to be able to like guard their little spot because it is precious and there's not much of it. Yeah. But then after a while, I find myself more and more hungry to play to like people that don't know this music. And in Nantes, where I live, we've been doing, there's obviously big like migration crisis with a lot of Africans coming into France, like sans papier. What do you call that? Illegal immigrants. Yeah. And there's a bunch of them that we're kind of working with, and we do benefit concerts. Right. And I did one not long ago, and that's where you're playing to people that don't know or care about what you do. You're just there with your shit, and you got to do something. And I like those contexts to kind of force yourself to try and come up with something that's like, I don't know, maybe coherent to the context and also coherent to yourself and your musical interests at that time. And I find they're really challenging and rewarding, those kind of contexts, and maybe somehow more difficult than just preaching to the converted. Yeah. So, and those contexts are harder and harder to find. So I think it's interesting to put the music, take it out of these little ghettos that we find ourselves in. Yeah.
True.
Yeah, but as I said, I understand why we need that, because it is precious, these kind of little communities you see. Especially here, I really relate to that when you see all the crew you're hanging around with, like, they're awesome, and they're doing, it's really important to them what they're doing, and that's what Make It Up Club was like, and hopefully still is. Yeah. And these types of communities that you can find yourself in all over the world. Yeah. It's like, fuck, it's really serious for these people. Yeah. It's like, it's what they're living for in a way. Yeah. They don't manage to make sense out of the society we're living in. It's their way of like having connection with other people around them, and so it's really precious. Yeah.
Yeah, I think here it's like, I don't know, it's such a cool thing as well, seeing how the scene here has really gone international in the last 3 or 4 years. And just the way all these connections are made between people that there wouldn't be a space for here otherwise. Like,
it's super interesting here. For me, it's also because of this link with the traditional music that's really hard to find in other countries in Asia. Like other countries I've been to where you look for traditional music concerts or even CDs to buy or whatever, it's like really, really, really hard to... I mean, you go to Thailand and you try to find like, got this music called FIFA music, which is... It's traditional Thai music with that, where they use a small kind of percussion gamelan type thing, and there's some links with Indonesian music and other instruments as well. And you go to Bangkok and try and find, I mean, it's impossible to find. I mean, it's nearly gone, you know. And there's many stories of like ethnomusicologists going to places in Laos and literally saving music by recording it or whatever, but otherwise it was literally going to be no trace of this stuff left. And in Cambodia it's similar, whereas here it's so present that, and it's day-to-day presence in the community, in the society here, that I'm kind of not surprised that the noise scene is what it is too, because it's not like without foundation. Like there's a lot of music in this place. It's more so than in other places I've been in Asia.
Yeah, Cambodia's a really sad case, I think. Was just
it's completely tragic.
Yeah,
completely tragic.
And Vietnam too, I think.
Yeah, man, these places are like, it's just like, it's super intense to experience this kind of like total lack of concern about just losing all sense of history and culture. It's frightening. I mean, Cambodia's for very different reasons. Cambodia was like wiped out by the Khmer Rouge and then like decades of civil unrest. And I met people at there's this place called Cambodian Living Arts in Phnom Penh, and they're trying to do like this patrimoine like work of preserving the history, where they're going around interviewing the elder people before they die. Because like after the Khmer Rouge, like people, there was no trace or documentation of the dance, the different culture of dance and music, and I mean it's insane. You know, that shit's it's gonna go. You know, it's gonna go. And there's this select tiny few that are trying to kind of preserve and document it. And it's pretty full on. And then you go and play top 40 songs in a hookah bar. It's because that's all there is. You know, it's like, Jesus.
Yeah, I've only been to one show there. It was a metal gig.
Right. Cambodian musicians, or?
There were two bands that had some. One was all local people.
Right.
And one was a mix, and then the rest of them were expat bands. Yeah.
I mean, I played there 2 or 3 times, and you know, and this is no criticism on the organizer of the concert, because he's awesome, but I didn't meet any Cambodian musicians. You know, like I'm sure there are some. But I kind of looked, but I maybe in the wrong place, wrong time, or whatever. But I mean, it's mainly expats coming through and you know, or different foreigners coming through and playing, or the people, expats living there. And so it's weird, you know, you're going to Cambodia, which culturally is like very rich place, but it's very hard to have any kind of connection with the people from there through our music. Whereas here in Indonesia, you know, there's more Indonesians doing news music than expats. So. And it's not just a kind of rip-off of Japanese and American or European noise music either. Like they're developing their own thing, and that's really present in their music, which is again something maybe a bit different to some other places I've been. So super inspiring.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
I don't blame you, man. I would be in a flash. I'd love to spend more time here.
Hopefully you can. Is there anything you want to talk about that you have coming up besides the 2 records we covered? Or
there's a new record coming in January on Black Truffle called Nisna.
Okay.
And that's an album of like, it's basically using mainly gamelan, bit of other percussion and drums, and that will be released in the end of January.
Great.
And then from there, I've formed like this ensemble, like called Ensemble Nisna, and there's like 8 of us, mainly percussionists, and we're kind of playing sort of more composition stuff, but pretty loose experimental works, basically. With a strong focus on gamelan and other percussion and gongs and. So we're touring in Europe in March and trying to find a way to get like half the group over here and collaborate with some musicians over here. It's not at all Javanese music or, I mean, it's pretty, I want to specify that because it's not like, we're not playing gamelan music as such. We're using some of the instruments for other purposes, and it's kind of just coherent with the stuff I've been doing for years anyway, using gongs and blah blah. So that's the main thing on the books for me. That's kind of the thing that's taking up most of my time and preparing for that.
Great. I'll be looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this.
Pleasure,
really
man.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Porous Borders. If you're interested in exploring more underground music from the Asia-Pacific region, you can check out my YouTube channel, Concrescence Records. You can find the link to that in the show notes. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review in the iTunes store. If you have suggestions or feedback and you want to get in touch, you can email the show at porousborders@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at @ANDRWMH.